Welcome to Decoding Healthcare Research. I'm your host, Efrain Riveros, Dr. E.F. Rain. Today, I have the honor of discussing a very important topic about hormesis with one of the experts in this area, Dr. Marios Kyriazis. He's a gerontologist and researcher of the National Gerontology Centre in Larnaca, Cyprus. Welcome, Dr. Kyriazis.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Thank you. So we will base our discussion on a paper that was published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine in 2023. The title of the paper is The Impact of Hormesis, Neuronal Stress Response and Reproduction upon Clinical Aging, a Narrative Review. And this paper is very pertinent as we delve into the different aspects related to aging. And it called my attention particularly because you have a unique approach to low levels of stress and hormesis and how you relate the central nervous system to the reproductive system. And we are going to talk about this. But before we dig deeper into the paper, my first question to Dr. Kyriazis is, what brought you to analyze hormesis as part of your research line?
Well, I'm a gerontologist and I have an interest in the biology of aging, among other things, clinical aspects as well, but particularly with the biology. I came to realize that the process of aging will not be affected significantly by the current approach. So I was thinking of examining different approaches, and the process of hormesis was something ideal to be applied in this respect. Hormesis is a Greek word, which means in Greek is ormesis, but it's based on another Greek saying, which says everything in moderation. So if we do everything in moderation, it's going to be good for us. But Hormesis analyzes this in scientific terms, goes into a very long process of investigation. And when we start talking about hormesis, I will explain some of the basics of it. But as I said before, it affects the process of aging and how we see aging and how we can interfere with it, among other things in our life.
I see, and I think it's very useful to start with a common ground when we discuss aging. And I like the definition that you gave in your paper. You describe the aging process as a time-related dysfunction, and you explain that as you age, you start losing some ability to adapt to a changing environment. Can you elaborate more on that, please?
Yes, there are many definitions of aging, depending on the researcher who is defining it. There are statistical definitions, biological definitions. I am trying to give it a clinical, everyday definition of aging. So basically, with the passage of time, due to different damages and the different processes that happen in our organism, we become unable to function properly in our everyday life, either due to disease, which is related to aging, or to other processes that are related to aging. So it's dysfunction that is related to time, dysfunction of the human organism. We are talking about humans mainly here, not other animals. And this is relevant in aging because many people may have illnesses or conditions, or they may be totally healthy, but it doesn't matter. What matters is their function, whether they can live their everyday life, do what they want within reason, and enjoy their life and be productive and creative. If they cannot have that, which is due to the dysfunction of aging, then we have a problem, and that's the main reason. That's the main problems that are related to aging: the lack of function in our environment as humans.
Exactly, and you mentioned the environment because we obviously don't live in isolation, and that interaction with the environment carries some stress, and it's important that you have the ability to respond to that stress, and that probably is a good segue to start discussing the concept of hormesis as it relates to the interactions with the environment. So let's talk about hormesis. What is the definition? And what is a good way to understand it?
Everybody's thinking that stress is bad for you, but there are two kinds of stress. One is the positive stress, and the other one is the negative stress. Positive stress is hormesis. Hormesis is when we have a mild stimulation of any kind. Like, we can discuss the different kinds of stimulation. So we have a mild stimulation which forces the organism to start repairing the damage caused by this mild stimulation. So in the process of repairs, the organism becomes stronger, and any age-related damage that happens to be around is also repaired. And this is used by applying a mild stimulation, not too much, and not too little or none at all. Stimulation can be, for example, nutritional stimulation. When we do calorie restriction, or when we do an age-defying diet, as we call it, we put our organism under mild stress. And the body tries to overcome this stress by activating the stress response, different biological mechanisms that aim to repair the damage caused by this mild stress. So it is up to a certain limit, we can repair ourselves and be stronger. If it's over a certain limit, then it's what we call negative stress, which causes damage. And if it's under a certain limit, then it doesn't do anything. It doesn't stimulate the organism, and we stay as we are. Basically, that is what hormesis is. It's a dose-response phenomenon. Too little is not good. Moderate stimulation is good, and too much is again not good.
It's like training our system with the low doses of stress, right? And I understand that behind all these types of stress, there is inflammation, and a low degree of inflammation that leads to repair is what hormesis is about. But I assume that as inflammation becomes overwhelming, that's when it becomes problematic. And there is a concept here that that is central and unique. We all have heard that homeostasis is important, and the body always tends to maintain all the physiological variables within a narrow range of values. But you mentioned something different, that is the homeodynamic space, that is more encompassing, and it relates to other aspects related to hormesis. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? This is just exciting and mind-blowing. I want to hear directly from you.
Yeah. Well, this is a concept that was first described by Suresh Rathan, another colleague of mine who is a biogerontologist. And it aims to be a more encompassing definition of normality of the organism, because this is a range of physiological states that we can stimulate, and the organism can cope with the stimulation, or it can be damaged if it is over a certain limit. That's why it's a space. So within the space, there is health. Everything works all right. Everything is within normal limits. If it is outside this space, this theoretical space, then we have disease and dysfunction. It is a bit different from the concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis, the second part is stasis, which means no activity at all in Greek. It may not be appropriate to talk about homeostasis because the organism is too complicated. It can have a range of functions, a range of activities, biological activities. And it's not static, it's always active, working. That's why we talk about dynamic space. It's dynamic, always changing, reacting with the environment, getting feedback. So that's what the aim is, to stay within the homeodynamic space. And this can be achieved through hormesis, stimulation of a certain moderate degree.
So
it is more like a theoretical aspect. This is more to study the biology of hormesis, but in our everyday life, we can just talk about hormesis. In other words, my stimulation, including every aspect of life. For example, I mentioned the stimulation through nutrition, but perhaps a more appropriate example is exercise, physical exercise. When we exercise, we put our muscles under mild stress. And during that exercise, our muscles become better functioning. Everything works better in the muscles. All the damage is repaired. If we don't exercise at all, or if we exercise too much, then both situations are damaging. And this is a typical example of hormesis, which keeps our organism within this homeodynamic space. In other words, everything is working as it should be.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way you describe it. So the homeodynamic space could be understood as some leeway that you have to move within the environment. No matter how much the environment changes, you can adapt, right? And you start losing that ability as you age. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. We lose the ability to to counteract any external and internal insults. The homeodynamic space becomes less and less with aging, and we cannot be flexible if we are in front of a sudden problem or a sudden stimulation or sudden illness. Then we are not able to counteract it because our leeway within this space is restricted. And this is the main problem of aging, seen it from a clinical point of view.
Yeah, and this is definitely clinically relevant and applicable, as you mentioned, to everyday life. And when we go deeper into hormesis, which is a critical factor for you to try to maintain that homeodynamic space, you mentioned that one of the mechanisms behind this hormesis is autophagy, and how you can clear proteins and stuff when you try to repair tissue, and on the side, you start also clearing some aging related proteins that may be defective and stuff. So what is the role of autophagy?
Autophagy is a process where damaged cells get dissolved and eliminated from the body. And this is a process that is found in aging and in many other situations. And through use of stimulation, of hormetic stimulation, there is possibility that autophagy is activated. And then all damaged cells get eliminated. That's what I said earlier. Our repair mechanisms get stimulated. One of those repair mechanisms is autophagy, and it eliminates cells, leaves space for new cells to be formed, and we have repair. Everything is back to normal, so to say.
Yeah,
and that's achieved through use of hormesis.
Yeah, it's a very exciting mechanism to understand, and it's interesting how you can affect that mechanism. You already mentioned caloric restriction and intermittent fasting, and also exercise. You also mentioned exposure to hot and cold, and this is something that I bring about because it's becoming common practice for people to use the sauna, for instance, Finnish sauna, or use cold plunges. So those are two ways to influence the hormetic processes, right?
Yes, there are different ways of stimulating ourselves, and exposure to hot through sauna, for example, or cold, it can be seen as a stimulation, as a physical stimulation of the body. There is research showing that this exposure to hot or cold activates different biological aspects, different proteins, the different stress response pathways, in an attempt to counteract this mild damage that is our body is exposed to, the hot and the cold, in other words. It's the same mechanism as the exercise, as intermittent fasting, and as other stimulation modalities. It activates several aspects of our repair mechanisms. One of those is the heat shock protein activation. And this can be done through other ways. Some ways are experimental, some can be applicable in real life. For example, centrifugal force, like the one we see in fairs. You go in a like a barrel, and the barrel goes round and round and creates centrifugal force, which keeps you on the side of the barrel. I don't know if you have that in mind or if you try it sometime.
Yeah, I used to try those things. Nowadays I get queasy. So
yeah, it's called hypergravity. It is another way of stimulating the organism, and it's a bit more experimental, and there are some others as well, but it is possible to stimulate our organism through that way, hormetic way.
And there are also some substances, right? Called I don't know how to say it. Hormetins
or hormetins, depending. I call them hormetins. Hormetins are substances which stimulate hormesis. So they are basically mild poisons, not with the way that we mean poisons. They are natural supplements which in nature, in small quantities, can be considered poisons, because the plant tries to protect itself and creates these substances. And turmeric, for example, is an example. Ginger, and some others. Rhodiola rosea, which is another plant supplement. And in small doses, even arsenic or hydrogen disulfide, which are considered poisons, in small doses, create a positive stress response in small appropriate doses. So everything depends on the moderation that I said earlier. Too much is not good, but these hormetins in a lower dose stimulate hormesis, which means that they stimulate all the different mechanisms that we mentioned, autophagy and heat shock proteins and many others. And this leaves, at the end, the result leaves the organism in a better state than before. That's what it is. I think it's simple.
Yes, and even caffeine, right?
Yes. In small doses, there is a lot of research proving that caffeine, chocolate, and other things that we consider bad, too much wine, for example, it's better to use those than not to use them at all. If you don't use them at all, you don't get stimulated, so you don't have hormesis. If we use them in a low dose, we get stimulated and we have hormesis. If we use too much, 20 glasses of wine a day, it's too much, so it's damaging. That's the general idea.
Yeah, and it's nice to see it that way. And I want to use caffeine as an example because it's a cognitive enhancer. And that allows me to go into the next section of your paper that has to do with neuronal stress response. So now we are going to focus on hormesis of the central nervous system in particular. And there are many things that happen in the central nervous system that when it is subjected to stress, low doses of stress. And in that regard, you mentioned that in the digital era, there is more stimulation to the nervous system and some stress responses. Can you elaborate more about that? It's really intriguing.
Yes, we need to see what's happening in our life. For example, now I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, but we are talking digitally. The information we exchange is digital, which means it's immediate, and it comes to my brain. Whatever you are saying to me comes to my brain immediately, and I have to give you an immediate reply. This puts my brain, my neurons, under some kind of stress, hormetic stress, because I have to give you a reply. It's not that something that is irrelevant to me. Your information forces me to act. So by assimilating the information you are sending me and forcing me to digest it and give you a reply, this is considered as the hormetic stress of the brain. Again, within reason, not too much. If I had to do 10 conversations at the same time, it's too much. If I didn't have at all to do a conversation, it's too little. But one conversation, like the example now, talking to you, is considered hormesis because it puts my brain under mild positive stress. And this biologically has different consequences on the neuron. It stimulates the neuron. The neuron has to create other substances which aim to repair the request of information that it has to digest. And we found that it creates certain other substances which have an effect on the germline, which is another aspect of my discussion, which perhaps we talk about later, because there are different interconnected aspects of this particular paper.
Yeah, and I think that's actually part of the substance of the paper, those interactions that we will discuss in a minute. And as you say, the brain is subject to that low dose of stress that forces you to act, and that's a different kind of stress that a muscle can have, but it's still stress. And but what intrigues me the most is that you make a connection. You mention something that is a trade-off. So as you respond to the stress of the nervous system, that comes at a cost, and that cost is going to be paid by the germline cells. So there is a connection between the neurons and the germline cells. Please tell us a little bit about that connection and how that trade-off between the two cell lines works.
Basically, nature wants survival, wants life. The germline cells, which are cells of the sperm in the man and the ovum in the woman, are cells that repair themselves effectively in order to pass the DNA to the next generation and ensure the survival of the species. There are biological mechanisms which aim to keep repairing the germline, this type of cells, the genetic cells, from aging, in order to have a very good DNA and pass it to the next generation and for life to continue. And this has been the case until now, because we used to live our life, have children, life continues through our children. Nature didn't care, so to speak, about who lives, as long as life continues. Life continues through our children, and we die because we don't have good repairs. We die through aging, but for nature it's the same. There is life. But now, because of technology and the exchange of relevant information, I have to stress it's relevant information that makes the brain think harder. The neurons, let's see it as a common sense approach. If you are exposed to information, your neuron has to assimilate that information, digest it, create a response. All of that requires energy and requires the neuron to be in a very good condition. We are forcing our brain, we are forcing our neurons through exposure of technology to keep working all the time, to repair itself, to be positive, to not to have any damage. And this alters the balance between survival of the children and survival of ourselves. Our brain needs to survive, wants to survive. So all of the energy resources that nature has given to them, germline, to the genetic line of cells, now we see that slowly is being reversed and going back to the neurons. The neurons request constant energy, and nature has to give it to them by taking it from the genetic system. And this has an impact on aging. In other words, if our neurons work fully and healthily, then we live healthy as well. We don't have damage. Any damage is repaired because of this positive stress, of these repair mechanisms that we talked about earlier. And if we live longer, if the brain lives longer, we live longer as well. And that means there is less repair energy available to the genetic line, so we have less children. But again, nature doesn't care because life continues. We don't have so many children, but we live longer. We ourselves live longer. And this means that life continues. And this is one of the main aspects of my theory, saying that we live longer ourselves, but without having children. This is something that has been proven in many species. Species of any animals that live longer have less children. And those who have a lot of children, progeny, let's say, don't live longer. Think about ants or mice. Mice have a lot of babies, but they don't live longer. An elephant has less babies, but lives longer. This is a mathematical aspect of survival in nature. And then new avenues open from here, because if this theory is correct, it means that we see in the human population that the more we stress our brain through technology, through this exchange of information, the less children we have. And then we see countries that are westernized, like Germany, or the United States or Japan. The more they live, the more technology they have, the less children they have. For example, in Japan, 40% of couples decide not to have children. Imagine that 40% of young couples don't have children and will never have children. This is because nature senses that the mechanism is being reversed from the genetic line, is going back to the nervous system. And it somehow doesn't have so much pressure on people to have children, because they can survive themselves and not through their children. We can discuss this in some more details if you want, because there are many different aspects of it, which at first glance they may seem not related, but everything is related.
Yeah,
So,
and there is actually empirical evidence of what you say, because there's the demographics of societies is changing, and that is definitely related to the fact that you mentioned that young couples are having more access to information, and their brains are stressed all the time, right? And that may have to do, as you mentioned, with the reduction of natality rate and all these population changes, and it's really interesting how you are able to connect the two aspects through things that are happening in the central nervous system. I think this is a theory that has you actually touch on different aspects, demonstrating the intimate relationship between the germline cells and the neurons that can create those connections for this theory to be sound and to have a lot of ground behind it. And
yeah.
and
Well,
yeah,
there are biological pathways that connect the neuron and the germline cells, the genetic cells. And the more we investigate this, the more we find that it's either one or the other. They are at a constant war between them. Each one wants the repair energy, the repair resources for themselves. The germline takes as much as possible of the repair resources to repair itself, and the DNA passes to the next generation unharmed. But now with technology, this is the new thing. We have this technology which forces us to exchange information quickly. And this makes the brain cell say, stop, I want to repair resources now for myself. Don't send it to the germline. And they take it back. And this, I'm not talking about individual people, I'm talking about humanity as a whole. It's not, I don't want people to think that I didn't have any children, that means I will live longer. No, I'm talking about humanity as a whole. You see that
as
more,
a species.
Yeah, the more technology is increasing in countries, the less children they have, and some of the mechanisms may appear unrelated. For example, they may be due to environmental pollution or to the effect of Wi-Fi the radiation through the Wi-Fi, which destroys the male sperm. We see that the quality of the male sperm has been decreasing over the past several decades. The cancer of the prostate is increasing. Cancer of the ovaries, of the reproductive cells, are increasing generally. And this is because nature is sensing that there is no need to maintain the genetic aspect of the organism anymore, because the brain aspect is taking over. I don't know if this is clear, but
yeah,
I think
it is.
clear. It's either one or the other for nature. And now we are going from the one to the other. Instead of germline, we have the neuron. And this is due to the exchange of hormetic information that stimulates the neuron.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's very clear the way you present it. So the hormesis is at the center to channel resources to the tissues that need it the most. In this case, the central nervous system, and that's at the expense of the germline. So it's like privileging the individual over the collective, right? Because the resources are going more to the somatic way rather than to the germline way.
Yes. So we live longer. Our body lives longer. And this is a way to so-called defeat aging, because if we have repairs of the damage, that means the aging, it doesn't affect us. So we live longer. But as a society, as humanity, not individual people, not 10 people who use internet are going to live longer, but the others are not. As humanity, as generally, millions and billions of people who put their brain under constant, suitable hormetic stress, slowly their biology is going to change, and their process of having children is going to diminish, but they are going to live longer themselves. So from the point of view of nature, it makes sense, because life continues, not through the children, but through us. So this is taken care of. And we have evidence that this is happening. If we keep looking in some detail, we'll see that this is now happening. I mentioned the example of genetic cancer, of cancers of the ovaries, of the prostate, of the testicles. All of these cancers are increasing. Homosexuality is increasing. What's the meaning of increasing homosexuality or other aspects of non-procreative sexual preferences? Why do we have, in many countries, we have increased homosexuality? It's because nature is sensing that having children is not absolutely necessary anymore. And through different mechanisms, social, biological, or other unknown mechanisms, is releasing the pressure from a man and a woman to have sex and have children, and allows other sexual preferences, which don't lead to the production of a baby. So that's one explanation why we have an increase in homosexuality in many countries. It's a natural aspect of this process.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's interesting because there is then the mechanisms go beyond the individual and start becoming like a societal driver, right? That start changing other things. And it's there is a connection between what is happening at the individual level and what is happening to the collective, and your theory is definitely something to consider, because it explains several changes at the societal level. And I appreciate you sharing all this with us, and it's been a very deep narrative review that is shedding light on different aspects, both, as I mentioned, the individual level and also at the community level. I want to thank you, Dr. Kyriazis, for being here with us today and sharing all this information with us.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
It was great, and for our audience, you will find the link to the paper that we discussed in the description of the video, and stay tuned for the next episode.